Hey, what's up? My name is Jensen and here we are. Welcome to the first legitimate video here on my channel. Let's get right into it. So whether you're a beginner, a hobbyist, or a pro, I appreciate your support here as we kind of start out with the nitty-gritty of what makes a good image. Now, the exposure triangle is what you will use to make a good image. And when I say a good image, I mean technically. Not necessarily creatively, but technically, meaning that your exposure is what you wanted it to be. Now, it doesn't matter what camera you have, whether it be film or digital, the exposure triangle applies to everybody. The three elements of the exposure triangle are first, shutter speed, second, aperture, and third, ISO. Today we're going to talk about shutter speed. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is literally how long your camera's shutter is open. And on film, that's how long the shutter is open and exposing the film that you have loaded into the camera. And with digital photography, it is how long your sensor is exposed to the light coming in through the lens. Now, shutter speed is an essential part of the exposure triangle. What you will soon learn about the exposure triangle is that it's not just about getting your shadows and your highlights balanced properly. The three different elements of the exposure triangle really have a large impact on the overall look and feel of the image. It is imperative that you choose the proper shutter speed for what image you're trying to capture. And pay attention to that it's how you want to capture the image. Not me, not somebody else, but you. You are in charge, you are the creative mind, and it's your choice what your image looks like. Okay, now back to the fundamentals of what shutter speed is. Shutter speed, like I said, is how long your camera sensor is exposed to the light that's coming through the lens on your camera. Shutter speed is typically displayed in fractions, that being fractions of a second. So unless you're exposing for stars at night or doing another type of long exposure photography, your shutter speed is likely going to be displayed in a fraction of a second. And about those fractions, stay tuned to the end of the video because I have a nifty little trick that will make sure that your photos stop coming out blurry or shaky. Now, on a film or digital camera, your shutter speed ranges typically from about one few thousandths of a second to a few seconds or both. Fractions are used to represent shutter speed simply because it makes the most sense. Decimals or some other way of explaining or representing shutter speed simply wouldn't do it. Fractions are simple, easy to remember, and easy to display. Once you get used to it, fractions are easy to wrap your head around and just make the process simple. All this talk about triangles and fractions is giving me a little bit of PTSD, but don't worry. The math that's involved in photography is simple, and I mean, come on, you're out in nature taking photos. If there's any time that I want to do math, it's in a place like this. So why should shutter speed matter to you? Now, like I explained, shutter speed is simply how long your camera's sensor is exposed to the light coming through the lens. The shutter in your camera is actually a little curtain. It can be made out of metal, fabric, plastic, it doesn't really matter, but the point is it's a curtain that covers your camera's sensor. That curtain's job is to open up and expose the camera sensor for exactly as long as you tell it to. So remembering that your camera sensor captures the light that's coming through your camera's lens, this means that the longer your shutter is open, the more light it gathers. And whatever happens out here in front of your lens when that shutter is open is translated onto your camera sensor. If you set your shutter speed to 1/2 or 1/4, that means that your sensor is exposed for 1/2 or 1/4 of a second. And anything that happens out here in front of your camera's lens during that time is going to be captured on your sensor and in your photo. But now if your shutter speed is something more like 1/2000th or 1/4000th of a second, your camera is only going to capture what happens out here for the 1/4000th of a second after you press the shutter button. That gives you a huge array of possibilities of what you can capture. Having a longer or a shorter shutter speed can do a couple things to your image. Now, the first reason why you'd want to change your shutter speed is because of light. If you want to capture more or less light, if your image is over or underexposed. If your camera's exposure readout is telling you that your image is going to be too dark or underexposed, that means you're going to have to lengthen your shutter speed and increase your fraction. So that means that If you're at 1/200th of a second and your camera is telling you that your image is going to be too dark, try bumping it back to 1/160th of a second or 1/100th of a second, whatever you think is proper to give you a good exposure. Another use of shutter speed is to freeze motion or to allow motion to be present in your image. I'm going to use this little Canon 5D Mark III to show you exactly what I mean. So here I've got a little rock in my hands, and I'm simply going to toss it up into the air and take a photo of it 2 times. The first time I'm going to start out at 1/25th of a second. So that means that the shutter is going to be open for 1/25th of a second. Then I'm going to increase it to 1,000th of a second and show you the difference. So here we go. And now that I dropped the rock into the water, I'm going to do it again at 1,000th of a second. Here we go. There we have it. So I'll show you those 2 images now and you tell me which one is better. Okay, here are the 2 images. Can you tell me which one is which? Hopefully you can see that this one is the 1/25th of a second and this image is the 1,000th of a second. See how this photo freezes the motion of that rock and it's nice and sharp there in the middle. Now this one, there's a lot of motion, it's too bright. That's because our shutter speed was simply too slow. While you're probably not taking pictures of yourself tossing a rock into the air every day, this same principle can be applied to all photography, whether it be sports or a portrait or a landscape. Freezing motion is important. When you want a sharp photo that freezes the motion that you're capturing, a higher shutter speed is going to get you that result. Now I'm going to show you a second scenario where I'm taking a landscape photo. Same deal, I'm going to take it at 1/25th of a second and 1/1000th of a second and show you the difference. Okay, there we have it. Here are the 2 images again, and now you should definitely be able to tell which one is which. I was trying to hold the camera pretty still in both photos, but you can see that one is a lot sharper than the other. Disregarding everything else about the photo, this one is definitely sharper than this one. Now, why is that? Simply because of camera shake. No matter how hard you try to hold your camera still, if you're going to shoot a photo at a slow shutter speed, you're going to need something like a tripod to help you out and keep that camera stable so that your photo is sharp instead of blurry like this one. Now remember to stay tuned to the end of the video because I have that trick that will help you never have that issue again. Speaking of tripods, here I am with my camera on one. So after those 2 examples, you might be thinking, like, why would you ever want to use a super slow shutter speed anyway? And here's one of those reasons. So here I have my camera set up in front of this beautiful little stream, and I'm gonna do a quick example for you. So I said that shutter speed can be used to stop or freeze motion, but it can also be used to accentuate motion in an image or smooth it out when you have your camera on a tripod. The tripod is gonna eliminate that camera shake that's present when you're hand holding it, but it's still gonna allow for motion in the image to be present. Now you've probably seen long exposure photos of waterfalls or streams, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do here. Now the first time years ago when I tried to take a slow shutter speed photo of a waterfall or a stream, I turned my shutter speed super slow, I raised my aperture, I lowered my ISO, I did everything I could to make that image as exposed correctly as possible, but when I brought my shutter speed slow enough so that I created that nice, glassy, smooth motion in the water, the photo was way too bright. So what helps with that is when you introduce an ND filter. ND stands for neutral density, and that means basically that you're putting sunglasses on the front of your camera's lens. The important thing is that this allows you to take a much longer exposure while still keeping your image exposed correctly. So let's try it out. Well, what the heck? Even on a tripod, it's still shaky. That's because simply the fact that you're holding onto the camera, pressing the button, that shutter is moving, there's still camera shake, even when you're on a tripod. Now, even if you have a small, dinky tripod like this that's not super stable, what you can do is set your camera on a 3 or 10-second timer. That way you can press the shutter button, walk away, and the camera will take the photo without you shaking it. So let's give that a try and see how it turns out. Okay, so let's try it again with a 2-second exposure, a 2-second timer, f/22, and ISO 100. Much better, look at that. Finally, another way of using long shutter speeds creatively is by taking photos of the stars at nighttime. Obviously it's not nighttime now, so I can't show you, but here's a couple photos that I've taken. Over the course of the afternoon today, while I've been making this video, I've realized that there is so much to shutter speed that I don't even think about on a normal daily basis when I'm taking photos, and that I can't even come close to including everything in here in this video. But I hope I've captured some of the basics to give you a good starting point to go out and take your own photos. And at the end of the day, you know what? That's my goal here with this channel. I want to get outside and start taking photos and videos as much as I can, and I want you to be able to do the same. Don't worry if you don't know everything, I don't either. I have a lot of experience, but I learn something new every single time I take photos. Now, to sum up what we've talked about today, shutter speed is a fraction that represents how long your camera's shutter curtain opens and exposes your camera's sensor. Simply put, your shutter speed is how long of a moment you're capturing with your camera. Secondly, it's super important to choose the right shutter speed for the image that you want to capture. Thirdly, it's up to you. It's your image, it's your creative brain. You get to choose exactly what you want to capture and how you want to capture it. Next, we talked about motion and how it's important to choose a shutter speed that's fast enough to capture the motion you want to capture, or slow enough to allow the motion you want to be able to show in your image. I demonstrated that by tossing a rock into the air and taking a picture of it. You saw that too slow of a shutter speed resulted in a blurry and shaky image, but a fast enough shutter speed was nice and sharp and in focus. Next, we talked about a simple example of a landscape shot taken of the mountain just over my shoulder and how camera shake can really affect your image. Okay, now here is that little trick I was talking about earlier. One rule of thumb that if you follow will ensure that your photos aren't shaky or blurry ever again is to make sure that your shutter speed is at least as fast as your focal length is long. That means if you're shooting on a 80mm lens, your shutter speed should be at least 1/80th of a second. Now, like I said, this is a general rule of thumb, and modern cameras with stabilized glass and stabilized sensors can do a really good job of making images with a slower shutter speed sharper. But if you want to play it safe and never have shaky or blurry images again, this is a good way to do it. Now, of course, if you have a fast-moving subject in your image, you're going to want to increase that shutter speed to freeze that motion. But for a typical image where everyone is standing still, like a portrait or a landscape photo, that should do the trick. Thank you so much, truly, for joining me here today and watching this video with me. I'm just starting out making these videos, so I'm doing my best to make them as good as I can, but trust that they'll get better and better in the future. If you want to see more content like this, and if you want to learn more about photography, videography, tricks and tips, and really just anything in this photography and videography space, please drop a like, comment on what you want to see, comment on what you think I can do better, and always subscribe. Subscribing is free and it helps bring more people to my channel and allows me to make more videos just like this. Again, thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy, stay happy, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.